In the previous episode of this mini-series, when I said that John Lennox was an Irish Catholic apologist, I remember thinking, is he Catholic? Is he Irish? I meant to check both of those things a couple of times, but I got distracted and forgot. I wish I had done, because even though it seemed like such a safe bet, I still got it wrong. Here in the States, we often think that if you're Irish, then you're Catholic. Irish Catholic, that's the common association. I've been to Dublin more times than I've been to Belfast, but I've been to both enough to note that they have distinctly different accents. However, to me, Lennox doesn't sound like either of them. But it turns out Lennox is Protestant, specifically Baptist, not Catholic. He's not even Irish. Lennox is from Northern Ireland. That's how my friends in Belfast jokingly pronounce Northern Ireland, where everyone is either Catholic or Protestant, and you better declare which side of that you're on, even if you're atheist. Someone from Northern Ireland said that they felt better about Lennox, thinking that he wasn't one of theirs, but several people from the Republic of Ireland corrected me, saying, in effect, "Don't you try to push that pompous arse onto us." So, let me begin this episode with a sincere and humble apology for my negligent oversight.
But I want to come to what I think is one of the fundamental arguments for theism. I take it this house believes in reason. That's why we're all here.
Well, that's why the atheists are here. There are some theists here too, but it's because they believe on faith instead. Quite the contrary. Faith is an unreasonable conviction, which is assumed without reason and defended against all reason. So what you have here is a conference of faith versus reason.
And as a scientist, I believe that the universe is rationally intelligible. That is something that has struck some of the geniuses of science as demanding an explanation.
Lennox demands an explanation for why reality is intelligible, while he himself believes in an alternative reality which is not intelligible. And the reason it's not is specifically because of the God he believes in. And the reason the real world can be understood so reliably is because there are no gods arbitrarily changing the laws of physics at their whim. Lennox also often refers to himself as a scientist, but he's really a mathematician. All but one of his degrees are in mathematics. He does have a Doctor of Science degree that was not preceded by an associate's, bachelor's, or master's of science. He just went straight to doctorate somehow. I wish I could do that. No one whose field is science can do that. And maybe it's because some DSc degrees are honorary, perhaps due to his books on the intersection of science with philosophy, theology, and religion. I don't know. But as far as I can tell from the various sources online, Lennox has never done science. Not in any field. I have a science degree, but I don't call myself a scientist because, one, I'm not employed as a scientist. Neither is Lennox. And two, I've never published to peer review, and I think you have to do at least that to even be an amateur scientist. Lennox has published 70 articles to peer review, which is respectable, but all of them are in mathematics. I haven't found where he's ever published anything strictly about science. Math and science are two different fields that are commonly closely associated, but should not be conflated. Though I have seen some polls and such that refer to mathematicians as scientists, and then contrast them against physical scientists. But in common parlance, all science is physical science. It's the Department of Math and Science, not math is science. There are different rules for scientific theories than for mathematic theorems. For example, science doesn't allow proof in the positive sense, because absolute proof is reserved for mathematics, not science. Mathematics doesn't have falsifiable hypotheses and so on, so they're not the same thing. If you tell people that you're a scientist, they're going to assume that you're doing field exploration or laboratory experimentation and publishing original research in the physical sciences, not math, which doesn't involve any of that. So I don't know why Lennox calls himself a scientist, other than because that title gives him more weight as a religious apologist. Someone whose belief system allows supernatural miracles, literally magic, to undermine methodological naturalism, also known as the scientific method.
Einstein said the only incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it's comprehensible.
thus contradicting his own point. So I think we can safely call that a joke and not take it as relevant to any point Lennox is trying to make here. Just remember that religious apologists love quote mining famous scientists. That's the apologist's favorite tactic, and that's why we see Lennox doing that so often in this presentation. In fact, just to respond in kind, let me do the same. Back around Y2K, the famous paleoanthropologist Richard Leakey once complained to me about the astonishing stupidity of creationists when he said that their movement is led by a dishonest bunch of operators and misquotation is the hallmark of their work.
And Wigner talked about the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics. How is it that a mathematician thinking in her head in here can come up with equations that seem to fit the universe out there?
Easy. Because physical things are measurable. They have to be quantifiable and or qualifiable if they're real at all. In order for a thing to exist, it must have properties. The theists don't like that because their God doesn't have properties, and therefore, logically, God cannot exist. That, and in any universe without a God, if you have a thing, and then along comes another thing, you now have two things. There's really no way around that. It's not like God was sitting around trying to devise a universe that could be mathematically analyzed. I think it would have been impossible, even for God, to create a universe that could not be analyzed mathematically, whereas a naturally occurring universe would have to be, or you literally have no choice. But Lennox seems to be arguing that if his God did not exist, then math wouldn't work, meaning that reality would no longer add up.
He said, 1 and 1 and 1 is 3.
Not anymore.
Because remember, he said,
I believe in a God who holds the heavens and the earth in existence.
so if his God does not exist, that means nothing can make sense, right? That's literally his argument right here.
Well, how is it indeed? Because the irony of the atheist position here is evident.
No, it isn't. We atheists are not foolish enough to make believe impossible nonsense for no good reason. What's ironic about that? We're not committed to any belief either, certainly not to keep believing something once we see that it isn't sufficiently supported. We accept whatever we do tentatively, based on our understanding of the facts, and we are obligated to change our minds if and when our understanding of the evidence demands. Whereas believers shamelessly admit and even insist that they will keep believing even if they know it's not true. It has often happened that believers will even admit to me that they will knowingly lie in defense of their so-called truth. So the irony of the believer's position is evident, but not that of the atheist.
My atheist friends, and I have many of them, tell me that the driving force of evolution, which eventually produced our human cognitive faculties, reason included, was not primarily concerned with truth at all, but with survival.
Well, it's not all about survival. It's also about differential reproductive rates extrapolated out of population mechanics over time. In a situation where every individual in every clutch or litter has slight differences from all of its siblings, then some of those differences will accumulate such that descendant generations will become increasingly distinct from their ancestors or cousins. Those who are better able to survive and procreate effectively will proliferate more abundantly. Easy to understand. But Lennox somehow doesn't understand that, because he is literally arguing that the pursuit of truth should be the driving force of evolution. How are populations of animals supposed to diversify or adapt to environments not through differential selection or survival under dynamic conditions, but instead driven by a philosophical quest for truth? Like, if we look back into the Permian period, we have herbivorous anapsids that are not trying to stay alive and procreate. Instead, they want to philosophize and pontificate. And predatory therapsids are not trying to stave off starvation. Instead, they want to contemplate their navels, or whether they have navels being hatched out of eggs. And how is that supposed to increase biodiversity? Do the two separate species become interlocutors in a series of academic debates? Or maybe evolution is driven by truth, because the Scutosaurus certainly knows that if it doesn't get out of there in a hurry, then the Gorgonopsid is going to eat it. That's the truth. Evolution is population genetics. biological. Truth is conceptual, philosophical. What Lennox is saying would be stupid no matter who said it, but for a man of his purported education, this is inexcusable. How can he be this confused? This man is a celebrated thinker who professes to speak on both evolution and philosophy, yet he doesn't appear to understand either one, because he says dumb things like this. If Lennox really believed that the pursuit of truth is all that matters, then shouldn't the first part of that be making sure that what he says is true before he tries to claim it? Would that Lennox himself were to focus on his own quest for truth and stop trying to make believe things that are not evidently or that are obviously not true. It would also help to know what truth means. I often say that the truth is what the facts are, what we can show to be true, not whatever else we might assume or imagine beyond or instead of that. Believers don't like that because it means that they can't honestly claim the truth to be whatever they want to pretend that it is, which is they insist on doing anyway, even when we're talking about the unknown. As my philosophically adept friend Matt Dillahunty explained,
features of reality are the actual, they are not true. Sentences express a concept. Neither the sentence nor the concept is true. Truth exists only in the comparison or evaluation between the actual and the concept. If the concept accurately represents the actual, we evaluate that as true. As a truth seeker, I seek accurate concepts about the actual. I'm seeking to gain concepts of reality that evaluate as true. The facts of reality aren't truth. They are the actual. And truth doesn't exist, in quotes, until there's a concept for comparison. The measure of truth or how the concept compares to the actual facts.
to put that more simply, there are myriad things in the universe that may be some particular way, but if we can't show it, then we don't know it, and we therefore can't honestly say that it is that way. Claiming facts that are not facts is what every religion does, and pretending to know things no one even can know is what religious faith is all about. But while every religion asserts baseless speculation as if it was a matter of fact, in every other application outside of religion, that would be considered lying. And if we're going to lob quotes at each other, then my favorite quote from Abraham Lincoln is this: "I believe it is an established maxim in morals that he who makes an assertion without knowing whether it is true or false is guilty of falsehood, and the accidental truth of the assertion does not justify or excuse him." So I don't have to prove that what you said is wrong. Theism often requires believers to think backwards, which includes reversing the burden of proof, as if whatever they say is true just because they said it was, and it remains true until proven wrong. But no, you have to prove that it's right when you say it, or else it's not right. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's false, but we cannot honestly say that it's true either, because then you would be guilty of falsehood. Thus, all religious apologetics is effectively lying to defend lies, and referring to those lies as absolute truth is lying too. It certainly is not the truth.
And we all know, ladies and gentlemen, what has often happened and still happens to truth when individuals or commercial enterprises or nations feel themselves threatened and struggle for survival.
This is why I classify lies with violence, because both are only justifiable as a last resort of desperate self-defense, and maybe not even then. But what Lennox does not reveal is what happens to truth when a religious apologist like himself is in charge of it, because professional apologists are all paid liars as a matter of necessity, and I think we can prove that. We all know, ladies and gentlemen, what happens to truth when believers become defenders of the faith. How do you justify being completely convinced of things that are not evidently true nor even possible? You make up every excuse necessary, any excuse necessary to rationalize any nonsense, justify any atrocity, or obfuscate every actual fact standing in the way of belief. Or you appeal to irrational emotions via any and all logical fallacies available, but do not admit any inconvenient truth that might dispel your favorite fantasy, because it doesn't matter what the truth is if you're determined to make believe some unsupported and thus indefensible assumption, regardless whether it's true or not.
Leading philosopher Alvin Plantinga of Notre Dame says if atheists are right,
And we are,
If atheists are right that we are the product of mindless, unguided natural processes, then they have given us strong reason to doubt the reliability of human cognitive faculties, and therefore inevitably to doubt the validity of any belief that they produce, including their atheism.
Well, first off, atheism is not a belief. It's the condition of not being convinced to believe without evidence what is told by those who speak without knowledge about things without parallel. Secondly, we know that humans can and occasionally do remember some things incorrectly. And sometimes we remember things different from how they happened, or different from how everyone else remembers that. Or we might even remember things that never happened at all. A fact that negates many testimonials of personal experiences. When everyone else remembers the same thing the same way except for you, you're the only one who remembers it your own way. The same goes for subjective impressions. You and I may both look at the same thing, and a combination of our collective ignorance, biases, and differences in our comprehension may lead one or both of us to the wrong conclusions. So we better be able to recognize that potentiality and correct for it via objective verification or testing for falsification. That's all of us. Both the rational thinkers and irrational believers have that same problem. But only the rational people realize it or do anything about it. Understand that John Lennox has famously, publicly said that he reconciled his faith with evolution, meaning that he accepts evolution, even though he obviously doesn't understand it. He knows he can't argue against it. And many Christian biologists have apparently assured him that evolution is real and true and indomitable in science, so Lennox believes what he perceives to be authorities telling him what to believe. So he believes what he's told, because that's what believers do. It's not what the facts indicate, it's what the authorities say. That's the mindset of faith. But now remember that our cognitive faculties were honed by evolution, not the pursuit of truth, but of survival. So if the tall grass is moving, it might just be harmless wind, or it might be because there's a tiger closing in. If we pursue truth and go find out that it is a tiger, we die. But if we're geared for survival instead, then we will keep our distance and seek cover, even if we think it more probable that it is just the wind. If there's even a minute chance that it's a tiger, then it's still a reasonable possibility, and thus getting away is still a rational action to take. There was a recent movie where a bunch of people who thought they were living in the real world find themselves trapped in an inescapable house being attacked by a vampire, and they try to figure out what to do.
Okay, what do we know about vampires?
That they're not real.
When the facts contradict your belief, you'd better change your belief. But now let's distort the once rational mind with a belief system requiring one to be completely convinced of what is not even remotely plausible at all. I was taught as a child how unwise it is to assume anything without cautious analysis first, which is why I had to start this video with an apology, rather than trying to rationalize how Lennox is technically Irish or secretly Catholic even after I learn otherwise. But I know religious people were taught to jump to conclusions because I've read where they said so explicitly. So let's give the mind of that believer such bias that it always only ever makes the required assumption and refuses to consider any other option than what it wants to believe, so that it rejects any and all evidence to the contrary, to instead believe with unreasonable conviction that which is neither evident nor even possible. Now we have strong reason to doubt the reliability of the believer's cognitive faculties and all the validity of their unsupported, indefensible, irrational, and erroneous assumptions of impossible absurdity.
Their biology and their belief in naturalism would therefore appear to be at war with each other in a conflict that has nothing at all to do with God.
That doesn't make any sense. First of all, naturalism is not a belief. Just as atheism is a non-belief in God, naturalism is a non-belief in magic, the so-called supernatural. Contrary to what Lennox says, that does have to do with God. If we don't believe in magic, then we don't believe in gods, because gods are made of magic. So rejecting God for the reason that we reject magic means that there is no conflict, apparent or otherwise, between understanding biology and not pretending as if it is miraculous.
Yet my atheist friends still insist that it is rational for them to believe that the evolution of human reason was not directed for the purpose of discovering truth. And yet, it is irrational for me to believe that human reason was designed and created by God to enable us to understand and believe the truth.
But as you have already demonstrated repeatedly, you don't understand the truth. And what you believe may as well be a pack of lies, just baseless assumptions piled atop other assumptions, and all of them false, unsupported, indefensible, unreasonable, and stupid.
Curious logic.
No, your logic is not curious. That's the problem. It's incurious, unquestioning, and it's not logic either. Instead, your position is a confluence of every logical fallacy known to man. Otherwise, yes, it is perfectly rational to limit our conclusions and our testable hypotheses only to what is in accordance with logic and reason, and not to make up unsupported and untestable fanciful fantasies that are not supported by any evidence, but contradicted by all irrelevant evidence, such that what you believe defies both logic and reason, making it irrational by definition.
By contrast with that, biblical theism asserts that ultimate reality is personal and intelligent.
Biblical theism asserts something that stupid, and you still believe it anyway? How did anybody ever come to celebrate John Lennox as a thinker? The man does not think. He doesn't even understand his own favorite fantasy folklore, because it holds that both the material life that we really do have and the alleged afterlife that we can only fantasize are both objective. And with both the real material reality and the believer's eternal alternative reality, they're not intelligent either. You're given only two options, both so extreme as to be unbelievable and unjust, both of them. In the best possible circumstance, which no one ever achieves, you'll go to heaven, where you'll be trapped in the presence of an indomitable despot who can read your mind. So you better be thinking happy thoughts, always, because it's also capricious and inexplicably insecure for an omniscient, omnipotent being. So you have to kiss its malignant, narcissistic ass all the time, and you'd better mean it, because he'll know if you don't. And don't forget, this goes on forever, with no possible end or escape, no way to just let it end. So that eventually you'd fantasize about suicide, knowing that even that will no longer work. The other option, hell, is somehow even worse, but at least you won't have to lie all the time and pretend to like it.
The reason science works, and this was the motivating force that drove the great pioneers of science, is that the universe out there and the human mind in here that does the science are ultimately the product of the same intelligent divine mind.
Some pioneer scientists may have held this position because, as I said, the question-begging fallacy is ubiquitous among religious believers, but several of the people who started with that position discovered things that made them question their belief in the Bible and then in God too. Which is why, for more than a century so far, the vast majority of scientists have been and are increasingly atheist. 110 years ago, in 1914, already less than a third of scientists believed in God. By 1933, that percentage dropped by roughly half that. And by 1998, that figure dropped by half again. That trend is never going to reverse itself.
Human beings are made, we are told, in God's image.
When in fact, it is the other way around. Man made gods in his own image.
And that means that science can be done.
Science could still be done whether your God exists or not, though science works infinitely more reliably without any gods than with them.
That makes infinitely more sense to me as a scientist than atheism does.
I guess that explains why you're not really a scientist.